This podcast is brought to you by A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London Middlesex, both family owned and operated. By the Diocese of Huron, a community where families and individuals from Windsor to Owen Sound, Grand Bend to Port Rowan come together to worship and serve. And by Molly Maid. Make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London today. Andrew Whitehead is an associate professor of sociology and director of the Association of Religion Data Archives at the Center for the Study of Religion and American Culture. His new book is American Idolatry: How Christian Nationalism Betrays the Gospel and Threatens the Church. Andrew is the latest guest on the Vicar's Crossing.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever and wherever you may be listening. Welcome back to another edition of the Vicar's Crossing podcast. The Vicar's Crossing is a virtual space where faith intersects with the public square. And your vicars are back. Happy to be here with you. My name is Rob Henderson, and I serve as the priest at Holy Trinity St. Stephen's in London, Ontario.
My name is Kevin George, and I'm a priest at St. Aidan's Anglican Church, also in London, Ontario.
All right, Kevin, we've got our fourth episode recording today, season 9 of the Vicar's Crossing, and wonderful guest today. Been very looking forward to chatting with this gentleman who wrote this wonderful book right here, which we're going to talk about, American Idolatry. And today we're welcoming foremost scholar of Christian nationalism in the United States, and he knows his stuff, Andrew Whitehead. Andrew is an associate professor of sociology and director of the Association of Religion Data Archives at the Center for the Study of Religion and American Culture.
Yeah, geez. Are you tired now? You want a drink? Let me get you a drink after that.
That's right. Andrew's research on Christian nationalism has been featured across several national outlets, including the New York Times, NPR, the New Yorker, the Washington Post, CNN Today, the Economist, Rolling Stone, and the Guardian. He has been interviewed on NBC News, National Public Radio, and the BBC, among others, and is routinely contacted for his perspectives on religion and politics from national and international news media. He has also written for the Washington Post, Time, NBC News, and the Religion News Service, among others. And today on his resume, he will pad that with an appearance on the Vicar's Crossing podcast. His new book is American Idolatry: How Christian Nationalism Betrays the Gospel and Threatens the Church.
I hope, and on his bio, the first thing before the New York Times, it says guest on the Vicar's Crossing. We'll see. We'll see. In the meantime, we want to acknowledge that the lands upon which we record this podcast are the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Lenapehoak, and Attawandaron peoples. We are on lands connected with the London Township and Sombre Treaties of 1796 and a Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. These lands continue to be home to diverse Indigenous peoples whom we recognize as contemporary stewards of the land and vital contributors of our society. And now, knowing the ways in which many of us have benefited from the injustices of the past, we encourage us all to consider ways that we can take ownership of our part in that and work towards reconciliation.
I want to take a moment to thank our sponsors, to A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London Middlesex, both family-owned and operated. Our thanks go out to Dave Mullen and the staff at A. Miller George for all their great support.
Amen to Dave. We also are thankful to the Diocese of Huron, place with which we're familiar because we both work for the Diocese of Huron, where families and individuals from Windsor to Owen Sound, from Grand Bend to Port Rowan, come together to worship and to serve, and we send out our thanks to the Right Reverend Todd Townsend, our bishop.
And our friends at Molly Maid, thank you for sticking with us over the last little while. Make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London today. Many thanks to Tricia Listar and for supporting us, and make sure you call Molly Maid.
Now, Rob, since we last talked, I had some news.
Oh, okay.
Did you probably heard?
I did read something.
Yeah, there was some stuff out there.
There was some stuff.
So I should probably just say to people that on Sunday, it was announced that I have accepted an appointment to the position of Dean of the Diocese of Huron and Rector of St. Paul's Cathedral. So I will be concluding my ministry here at St. Aidan's at the end of 2023, December 31st, and starting at the cathedral on January 1st. So changes in the air. So then I'm going to have to start saying that I'm now from the cathedral instead of from St. Aidan's. So I have a lot of mixed feelings, a lot of excitement about possibilities, but obviously a lot of heartbreak about leaving an incredibly good place here at St. Aidan's.
Absolutely. Congratulations. And I know you're looking forward to something new, but it is a difficult thing to have to step away to. And, no, happy for you. Congratulations, my friend.
Thank you, buddy. You've been a great support in all of it too. And I think the thing is that I want to get across to people is, because there's a lot of temptation for people to buy into the seduction of sort of the foolishness around power and upward mobility and that sort of foolishness in the church. For me, I don't see this as advancement or in any ways being moving up or anything. It's every parish is worthy of a good leader. And St. Paul's is in need of that right now. And I hope I can faithfully provide it. And St. Aidan's also deserves a good leader. And I pray that they will find the next person. But I'm certainly not going to a better place. And I'm certainly not being promoted. I'm shifting parishes.
That's right. Good. Good. Well, thank you for mentioning that, and look forward to seeing what's to come. It'll be great.
Yeah. And by the way, we're even on beers, aren't we?
I think we are now. Yeah, I think I lost the last bet from last week, so we'll have to settle the score. We can just wait for 16 or 18 weeks. How long is this?
Let's see how it plays out.
And see, we could be, like I might be up 14-4 or something. And
so for those who are wondering, we're talking about the Lions. And so we bet first week, I bet that the Lions were going to win in more than 7. They didn't. Rob said in about 3, less than 3, and he was right. Yeah. And then last week I said more than 7 again, because it was Green Bay. And Rob was like, "Oh, no, I like love the new quarterback." So he said, and it was a blowout after the first half.
Yeah, exactly. So I lost that one.
So what's going to happen this week?
So this week they're playing Carolina at home. I think
in Detroit.
I think the line's like 9 or something like that, or 8.
Ooh,
for Detroit's the favorite. So I'm going to say it's going to be a blow. I'm going to say they're going to win by 14.
Okay, so I'll go the other way for just to be the contrarian.
Okay,
I will say that the Lions will win, but it will be a margin of 5 or less.
Okay, you're calling a close one. All right.
Okay, 5 or less.
Okay. Well, we'll see if we can break that tie.
We'll see where we get.
And see where we go. Good stuff. Yeah. Hey, there's a football team called the Indianapolis Colts in Indianapolis, and that's where Andrew lives. So I'll have to ask him about that.
Wasn't there a guy called Manning or something who used to be a quarterback there?
There was, Mr. Manning. I think didn't he win a Super Bowl with him?
I believe he did. I believe Peyton Manning won a Super Bowl there in Indianapolis.
Right. That's right. So we'll ask Andrew about that. Andrew Whitehead is our guest, and he's coming into the Zoom room now to chat.
Here he comes.
And Andrew Whitehead is our guest today, and the book is American Idolatry. For those on YouTube, you'll be able to see the cover there.
There it is. Beautiful.
There it is. And Andrew's going to talk about the book and so much more with us. Andrew, welcome. We're so glad you could spend some time with us.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. I'm looking forward to it.
So does this mean where is he, Rob? Where's this guy hanging out?
You're in Indianapolis, right? I was going to say, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, central Indiana, nice and flat, gray clouds. That's it.
Oh, is it? Yeah.
Colts? Are we into the Colts? Is that
I mean,
not cults. Colts.
Yeah, both. Yeah. Not personally, follow the local sports as I can, but they're rebuilding. So I think everybody's trying to wait for the glory days to come, hopefully.
Listen, Rob and I are Lions fans. So like we lived in Windsor across the river from Detroit for years. So we know about rebuilding. We've been rebuilding since the day franchise started.
That's right.
They're looking good this year.
All my life. Yeah, they do. They do.
Yeah.
We'll take it.
Well, look, and what about Baylor? You got anything to say about Baylor? Because they're into the sports, yeah?
They are. Yeah, Baylor is definitely into sports. They've, got to figure some stuff out of how to, manage sports and, ethics and values and all those things. I'll leave it at that.
Okay, good for you.
Yeah. So there's some work to be done, but hopefully they continue on that path.
Yeah. It's a Baylor grad here. So
yep. Yeah. I'm an alum.
Yep. So listen, at this book, I really loved it. I couldn't put it down. Once I was so thankful to Brazos and the folks who are sending it over, and shout out to them and to you for this incredible piece of work. Congratulations. Just to jump right in, at the outset of the book, you note on that on your own journey, you've come to believe that in order to faithfully follow the teachings and example of Jesus of Nazareth, you must work to disentangle Christianity from Christian nationalism. The two cannot coexist. You note that we must choose to serve one or the other. Christian nationalism, you say, betrays the example set by Jesus in the Gospels. We agree. Christian nationalism leads to practice various forms of idolatry, revealing a god or gods other than Jesus, trusting them for protection and for provision. And you also note that you're not alone in that you've had increasingly more conversations with people who are trying to fight back against this same issue. Hundreds of people, you write, whether it's in their congregations or in their daily lives or in their communities. I wonder if you can say more about why write this book now and the need for this conversation as so many try and navigate these sort of really tumultuous times, as it just seems to be so prevalent.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I think in some ways the book at this moment is the culmination of a personal journey, a professional journey, and so professionally, just studying religion in the U.S. and leaving grad school and graduating in 2012, and various academic stops along the way, just trying to understand what Americans believe, why they believe it, and how religious beliefs can influence how they see their social worlds, and how culture can shape religion as well. And as trying to explain some hot button issues, whether it's race or gender, sexuality, different things that America and Americans have been arguing over, talking about politically for decades. Colleague, Sam Perry and some others, and I, as we worked on this, started to see that the degree to which Americans believed, this narrative that the U.S. was a Christian nation, is a Christian nation, should be a Christian nation, the more strongly they held that view, the more likely they were to hold very particular views towards these hot button issues. And it really started to explain some of that polarization and above and beyond their personal political beliefs or even their personal religiosity. So there was something about wanting to see this particular expression of Christianity privileged in the public sphere that was driving American attitudes, that was serving as a framework for how they saw their social world, the national identity, what it should be, what it should mean to be an American, and what America should be. And then in my own personal journey, growing up in white evangelicalism, a conservative part of the country and conservative evangelical congregation, and learning about the Christian faith there, to love the Bible, love God, love your neighbor, all these values and beliefs. But then growing up and seeing how that faith interacted with the public sphere sometimes, and raising questions, right? So if we're pro-life, why does it mean, this politically, but not this politically, right? And starting to think through some of those issues, and then learning a history of America, of the United States specifically, how Christianity was a part of some of the atrocities, maybe more than some, and trying to wrestle with that too. And so that personal journey of what does it mean to follow Christ, to love God and love our neighbor in the public sphere. And then as a sociologist, what does that mean for understanding how religion operates in the US? And so some of that culminated with the first book, Taking America Back for God, that I wrote with Sam, where we really lay out what Christian nationalism is, and in an accessible way, try to show what all it's associated with. And then in this book, why write it now? With the 2016 election, and then the next 4 years, and then 2020 happening, we were able to highlight and provide a framework, I think, for folks to understand how Christian nationalism operates, what it is, and hearing from folks that this helped them make sense of what they were seeing in their congregations and in, around the Thanksgiving table, the stuff they were hearing. And so, hearing that, and then with January 6th happening too.
Wow.
The people at Brazos reached out and said, would you consider writing for a Christian audience in this sense? And I was hesitant right at first, but then I thought, well, perhaps, I will take this step, because it is, a departure in a sense from the writing I've done in the past, but wanting to talk to Christians and say, hey, as a fellow Christian, here's what we know empirically. Here's the evidence that social science has handed us. And now what does that mean? What are the implications of that, not only for democracy, but for the Christian faith?
So I think, thank you for that, because I think that's exactly like, you mentioned a previous book you did with Sam, which is an academic work, right? Like you guys sort of really delve into that. This is very accessible for people, I find. Like, I think this book actually allows, because in many ways it is, to use a word that gets used in evangelical circles a bit, I guess it's kind of testimony, right? Like there's a lot in here of you and of what you've experienced. So just to sort of touch on something a little more academic, I suppose, in a way, before we go too far, is to help our listeners, some who may question what we use words, right? Like, so Christian nationalism, what are we speaking about when you write Christian nationalism? What are you talking about? And then specifically the qualifier of white Christian nationalism, because you take great pains in the book to point out why that matters.
Yeah. So when we're talking about Christian nationalism, what that means empirically, it's an empirically supported definition I want to add. So we're not just kind of pulling it out of thin air.
I just pulled this word out of my ass.
Yeah, totally. And folks that want to, kind of push us to the side or not want to really engage with the findings will say, well, nobody has a good definition. And every time I'm thinking, no, we do.
We do.
But to say that allows them to try and ignore. So when we're talking about Christian nationalism, it's the desire for the fusion between a particular expression of Christianity and American civic life. So the national identity, our sacred symbols, our policies, to align according to the dictates of this particular expression of Christianity, and wanting the government to vigorously defend and perpetuate this cultural framework of Christian nationalism in our ideals and how we function. And so the particular expression of Christianity is key, because it isn't just the historic kind of orthodox beliefs like the creeds or that Jesus was the Son of God, although it contains that. But it adds in what I like to think of as all this other cultural baggage that in many ways is unique to the American experience, right? Due to our history and different things that have happened. So it adds this in, and it becomes this mix and intertwined where in the minds of many Americans, and this is similar to myself growing up or those that I grew up around in those communities, where to be Christian essentially is to take on not only the historic beliefs, but then all this other cultural baggage as well. And then it's hard to distinguish between the two. And so when we're talking about Christian nationalism, again, it's the desire for a particular expression of Christianity to be privileged in public and civic life. And so this particular expression, the reason why in many ways it is a white Christian nationalism, is that one of the elements of this particular expression of Christianity, which is very conservative politically and religiously, is that it contains this desire for strong ethno-racial boundaries around national identity. And this isn't something that folks, that we would survey or maybe even interview would explicitly say. But every time we ask the questions that we use to create this Christian nationalism scale, and none of those questions contain anything about race. But what we find is that depending on how you answer those questions, if you embrace Christian nationalism over and over, we're finding that when they're imagining a Christian nation, quote unquote, they're imagining a white Christian nation where it isn't as though, we're talking about the skin color of a person that holds these views, but that Christian nationalism creates and perpetuates a society that benefits whiteness and white people as a group, as a whole. Not that every white person is richer than every racial minority or anything like that. But then when we look at the group level, the benefits of society tend to flow towards one group as a whole. And in the US historically, and even today, that those are white Americans. And so white Christian nationalism is pointing to the fact that when we're talking about a Christian nation, it is this vision of a nation that is racialized, that benefits white Americans over and above, as a whole, racial minorities.
Right. So it's understanding that and having a good wrapping your head around that, but also for us, I think too, and you talk about this in the book, is to ask ourselves, well, how can we make a difference about that, and not just have that understanding. And I think you encourage the reader in the book to do that, and you call on the reader to consider what life might be like if we begin to live our lives believing that even some small actions that we can consistently take now, a practice of faithful resistance, if you will, can reverberate through our communities and our congregations and our denominations. And I just wanted to just quote a little bit from the book for our readers. Andrew writes, "While we cannot go back and change the past to reduce the negative influence of Christian nationalism on our civic life today, we can act today in order to change tomorrow. I am convinced we must, at the very least, try. What you choose to do today to confront white Christian nationalism in your own life, the lives of those around you, or the systems of which we are all a part matters. We can commit now to consistently making these choices, hoping that the seeds planted, however small, will someday grow and provide shade to the entire garden where all can flourish."
Amen.
And that's just so important. I wonder if you could say more about how these small actions, or what people might see as seemingly insignificant conversations, even can be so critically important.
Yeah, definitely. It's one of the parts of writing a book. One of the fun parts. There's a lot of parts that aren't as fun, just because it takes a while and it's hard and lonely.
Yeah.
But it brings around conversations like this. But one fun part of the book is being able to think of different types of metaphors to illustrate some of what I'm talking about. And one of them is with movies from when I was a kid, like Back to the Future, or more recently the Age, or the Avengers and Endgame and all of that, where there's kind of this trope that if you go back in time, if you do too much, right, it'll just send all of the future careening off course, right? Like one little action could dramatically change the fabric of space and time. And partially, yes, it's a trope for those movies to give it weight.
And the next thing you know, you're married to your mother.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. She wants to,
hate when that happens.
Nonetheless, I apologize. I interrupted, but I had this thing flash before my Marty.
Yeah, that's one of the weirdest parts of the rewatch of that movie.
Yes.
Like, okay, this is strange.
This is getting creepy.
We're quite a time. Yeah. Yeah. So, this idea that we just fundamentally accept, though, right? As we're watching it, like I never question that. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. But we never think of the little things we could do now that they could have an effect, right? They could similarly really change what the future might hold. And so just trying to adopt that, because I think as I look at my own journey, and I know the journeys of those that I've interacted with over the last number of years, where, in the book too, I kind of highlight these different little moments where some of the taken for grantedness of this idea of a Christian nation, that to be American is to be Christian, and to be Christian, then you're a good American. Little moments and interactions and times where that veil was kind of pierced for me. And so, part of what I want to do and encourage folks is that as we serve as connections to people that may take this for granted, we raise questions with them in relationship, firmly but gently. We can help on that journey, provide, something like a pebble in a shoe where, it may not just, they're ready to throw off the vestiges of Christian nationalism, but as they continue their journey, it just sticks in there. And then they have to think more about it. They have to do something about it. So I think those interpersonal connections are key, and we can serve as these trusted others that folks will listen to, and maybe that we don't even have to try and argue with them about the rights and wrongs, but to raise questions that allow them space to then question themselves, things they took for granted. So there's that part. And then I think too, a fundamental insight of sociology is that it isn't just individuals' beliefs and values that shape society, but that systems and how systems operate, structure society for us. And so it isn't just changing individual hearts and minds that will change the systems of society, but those function according, to different things. And so then too, for us to think about not only how we can serve the people in front of us or that are hurting, but then to see them as part of a community. And then what can we do to serve those entire communities? That is thinking at more organizational level. because that's a reality we have to face, is that it isn't just that we get all Americans to let go of Christian nationalism, but we need to change how our organizations operate, our congregations. There's system level changes that have to be made too. But I guess the desire is to see that what we can do today, even the little things, we don't know how that might resonate, how that might change going forward. And, you know, as people of faith, and this is hard for me, to do those things and maybe not see much fruit.
That's right.
Or trust that maybe we don't see any fruit, but to do it all the same.
Yeah, definitely. So there's this, fact that, there's white Christian nationalism, as we've mentioned today, largely a product of white Christianity in the United States. But that's not limited to the congregations or the people who make up these groups. The cultural influence of white Christianity helps diffuse the tenets of Christian nationalism across the population. And you make the case that Americans, both in and outside of organized religion, use Christian nationalism as a motivation and a justification for their actions, for what they're doing. I wonder if you could say more about this and how we kind of see it play out, because like places like the insurrection on January 6th, for instance, was an example of that. But maybe say more about how this kind of plays out across the board.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so I think you explained it really well, where when we're talking about the cultural framework itself, it was created and perpetuated within white Christian cultural institutions. So those denominations and congregations, that's where it started. But empirically, what we found is that it has diffused across the population. So when we survey American adults, even outside of white Christian congregations, denominations, institutions, there's a smaller number, but there's still a minority, a significant minority, who embrace Christian nationalism. And so in that sense, it isn't just tied to white Christianity institutionally, but that it exists outside of it. And that is important because, as some colleagues of mine found in another paper, when they were looking at the social movement of the Tea Party, you had folks that were not religious, and you had folks that were really religious, and had even different political ideas of what that means. Some were more libertarian, others were maybe a little less, but here they are finding themselves together in this movement. And Christian nationalism, an embrace of this idea that the U.S. is distinctively and should be distinctively Christian, brought them together. And so it provides something like a glue that can bring groups together that normally might differ on other, other predictors, even religion.
Right.
So when we're looking at the insurrection, and this, we didn't survey anybody that was actually there, so I don't want to say that, we have direct survey or empirical evidence of those. But in reading the reports of that day, to watch the videos of that day, you see Proud Boys, which is a white nationalist violent movement, and not explicitly Christian, but they're all kneeling together saying a Christian prayer that you would hear anywhere. And then you have folks that were explicitly religious and whether Pentecostal or Baptist or Catholic. And then you have folks that were kind of spiritualist, I'm thinking of the QAnon shaman, right? So all these folks are embracing various aspects and not the same. They're not all, equal in how they see it, but various aspects of this idea that the U.S. is connected to God and has this special place in God's plan. And so that shows the power of this cultural framework, that it can bring groups together that hold this view in tandem.
It's interesting, and Rob will know what I'm talking about here, but we had a terror attack in this city 2 years ago where a young man, 20 years old, went out and bought a truck for the purposes of coming to a neighborhood where there's a lot of Muslim families, and he ran over a family, killing 3 generations, a grandmother, her son, her granddaughter, and a 7-year-old boy survived, but mom, dad, grandmother, and teenager died. And the trial is on right now of this young man. And I was thinking about it when I read this part of the book and how you just described that answer, because he's not, from all the evidence that's coming out at the trial, he's not connected to any particular church, but he was inspired by all these folks who likewise are not necessarily part of a church, but write these white nationalist manifestos with
Mhm.
religious language.
Yeah.
And he took a white T-shirt and he spray painted a cross on the front and on the back before he got in the truck to go do what he did. So this is done with the symbiology of Christianity, and so you see the effect, right? It's not a guy who's in a church every week, banging a Bible, but he's got these ideas, and this is where they've come from. It's it's shocking.
Yeah.
Anyway, the other section but one of the sections of the book, I guess, that I really like was this business where you ask, can I oppose Christian nationalism and still be, and you say, a Christian or a patriot? You write at the part you wrote about patriotism. I just loved it. Posted on Facebook yesterday because I just loved it. It says, being a patriot means we tell the truth about our nation's history and we work toward a future in which everyone is able to participate. Doing so reveals artificial stories for what they are and creates space for truer ones. We can then fulfill unrealized aspirations, creating a space where all are able to enjoy life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Christians should also wholeheartedly endorse this project. Only when we recognize the kingdom of God as superior to the nation can we speak truth to power and maintain a prophetic stance, advocating for those on the margins. When we consider, you write, ourselves as part of the kingdom of God, we can acknowledge the politics and power in this world can be leveraged for the benefit of all and not just for those like us, whoever the us is, right? We can commit to demanding that the hurting, the sick, the powerless live without fear of violence, receive healing care for their wounds, and be able to exert influence on our communities and nation as bearers of the image of God. Advocating for the rights of our neighbors is the work of Christians. That sounds like patriotism to me. And I was like, oh yeah, that's a patriotism I can get behind. So can you say more, Andrew, to our listeners about it's okay to be against Christian nationalism and still be a patriot and still be a Christian?
Yeah, definitely. And this is, I think, where a lot of the rubber meets the road for folks, where, they sense something's amiss, right, with this quest for power, and they see it kind of marginalizing folks or quieting different groups or even oppressing them. And many, when made aware of that, would say, well, I don't want that. But there's still a fear and a sense of threat that they're going to lose something. And part of that is they feel as though they'll have to lose their faith because it's been so tightly intertwined. To talk about and against Christian nationalism, they feel as though it's talking about and against Christianity. And so in some sense, it's kind of like diffusing a bomb. Those wires get crossed, and if you pull the wrong one, they feel it's all going to go. So I've had folks, even close family members that would say, well, are you still a Christian? Because I speak out against Christian nationalism. So it kind of illustrates how closely intertwined they are. And so in that sense, I think, it helps to point out and to think through that extra cultural baggage that gets handed to us, and speaking with and reading the experiences of folks outside of our context who are Christians, or who are minority groups within our context who are Christians, who can help us see the blind spots that we might have as more majority type groups who embrace Christianity. And so, the goal is to help provide some of those resources to think through how to let go of some of those aspects that are harmful, that have been added on. And we've been told and handed, you have to do this if you're going to be a faithful Christian. Those, you're going to hear and see those as 2024 election gets closer here in the States, right? Like, you vote for the wrong group, how can you be a Christian? Or if you vote against X, there's no way that you could ever go to heaven. And that is, this is an inside the religion, inside baseball type of thing, but that's, heretical.
That's right. That's right.
It isn't as though those folks aren't also Christians. They are, but they're putting extra, boxes that you have to tick in order to faithfully live it out. And so thinking through that. And then with the patriot part, patriotism too, we can think about it as an affinity for our fellow countrymen and women. But I think the goal then is not at the detriment of people who aren't from our country, or at the detriment of other countries or minorities, and racial, religious, gender, sexual minorities, all these different folks. We can feel a sense of camaraderie, and I think especially responsibility towards others who are a part of our, group, the historical accent of where we've been born. But again, seeing that not in the perspective of scarcity, but that there's an abundance. There's enough for all of us. And I think, a line in the book that resonates with me and has with others is that, equality, when you're used to privilege, feels like discrimination. So for white Americans, especially, or white men like me, I've been privileged in this country. There's never been a moment that if I went back in time travel is becoming a kind of a theme podcast. But if I went back in time, that I would be, targeted as a minority, right? Literally no time in US history. But that's not true for a lot of other folks. And so to think through that, that's privilege. It isn't something that I did myself, but that I still benefit from. And so thinking through, well, how can we bring other folks to be able to enjoy what I've always enjoyed, or my group, right? To enjoy those things as well. Doesn't mean that now I can't enjoy them, but it's not that I'm the only one now. And if that costs me a little bit, wouldn't that be Christ-like to then say, I want to make room for others? Wouldn't that be patriotic to say that this country can serve and benefit others? So those are the things that I was thinking through.
And by the way, if we do get to go back in time, since this has become a thing, I think you and I should be able to enjoy one more day with a full head of hair.
I know, right? Yeah. I don't know when yours started. I
was like 18 or 19. So I'd have to go back to my teenage years, okay? But I do believe you. I just wanted to tell you, you have a beautiful head. I love your hairdo. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. It takes a bit of time.
Oh, I know, it's hard work.
That's right.
Andrew and I don't just jump out of bed. We don't jump out of bed like this, folks. We have to work out.
There's a lot of passion and energy.
There's a lot. Sorry, Rob. Rob, you and your head of hair.
Yeah, that's sorry. I can't understand, guys. That kind of what you're talking about leads me into my next question, really, about race. And race and racial inequality certainly is so embedded in the American story and history. And there's a question that you pose, and I really love this little section of the book. You write, does Christianity have anything to offer regarding racial injustice? And you've been open to us, and you certainly are in the book, and honest about your upbringing in the evangelical world. And you wrote this about that. You said, I was completely ignorant of the ongoing effects of America's history of racial discrimination in housing, education, criminal justice, and healthcare. My actions implicitly supported the idea that the United States was indeed a meritocracy where all could create a better life for themselves, and God would bless them if they would only try hard enough.
Right? Bootstraps.
Yeah, exactly. And Andrew, that really resonated with me because, living in different countries, but there's this parallel, because that's exactly what I thought. And Kevin and I have talked about this many times in the podcast about First Nations people in Canada, the first peoples that were here. So many of us were completely ignorant about the fact that we even had Indigenous people in our own neighborhoods. I mean, growing up with that privilege and those blinders on. And if they were a topic of conversation, it was usually in a very ignorant and harmful way. And those of us in the church right now, especially here in Canada, reconciling this truth because of our involvement in the residential schools in this country. And we were absolutely blind to the suffering and trauma of First Nations and Indigenous peoples and the children that went to these schools, and the church participated in that. And we were going to the church at the same time it was taking part. So anyway, I just saw this similarity, and I was reading your book. So whether it's like Black Americans in the US or First Nations people here in Canada, we have functioned with blinders on. So I guess my question is, if you could comment or say something about your thoughts on how organizations, maybe like the church, can take steps toward righting some of these injustices, because we are responsible for them.
Yeah. I think that's a big one. And that's something too, I'm still learning and thinking through. Because, part of it is recognizing whether here in the US it's, Black Americans and what they've been forced to endure from the beginning, even before the beginning, or the indigenous populations that were here and forced off land, and genocide that was perpetuated against them, or the boarding schools, right, that here in the US and in Canada that were a part of it, or Asian immigrants and how they were treated, that it isn't just a black-white issue, but it really is a racial and ethnic minority and immigrant issue broadly. And then to those we brought here against their will. And so I think part of it, one part of it is groups and organizations wrestling with it collectively, that history. Right. Part of it is we just need to know what that history is and tell the truth about it. And so there are congregations doing that. There are organizations trying to equip and resource folks to do that. So I think that's the big first step is hearing the cries of injustice and acknowledging them, and then taking ownership, not that we necessarily were the ones that perpetuated it, but that it created a reality that we benefit from today. And so while we may not be personally responsible for bringing folks here or pushing folks off their land, we are responsible for the effects of that on those communities today. And what can we do then to, again, bring flourishing and a common good to those communities? And so in the book, I try to provide some examples of congregations or people doing some of this work, not as a now, go and do likewise, although maybe you can, an individual or a congregation can do the same thing, but to hopefully ignite the imagination, because I know that folks are so creative, and in the situations we find ourselves and the needs that surround us are different for different groups. That some of that, the expressions of confronting and opposing Christian nationalism, reckoning with racial inequality, whatever that might look like, or the inequality that other groups have faced in your context or in your neighborhoods, communities. What's exciting to me is to see that creativity come out, but hopefully to show the call for Christ followers and any American, but again, speaking directly
Canadians too.
Yeah, and Canadians too. But to fellow Christ followers, that there's a history here and we didn't get here accidentally. Right. And that it still resonates today. And to recognize that fact that the ripples are still with us. And so what can we do to take ownership? I heard, this was somebody talking about in terms of disability and structural impediments to equality for disabled Americans. They talked about, let's say that you were gifted from, maybe a family member, grandparent, or, great uncle or something, a hotel. And now you're the owner of the hotel. You get to benefit from what he built and run the hotel. But, when he built it, there were only steps. There weren't any ramps or ways for folks to get in there. And so while you didn't necessarily build the hotel and make it so that disabled folks, couldn't get in, now that you own it, you're responsible for those effects. And so morally, ethically, to be a person of justice, you would want to build a ramp so they can access it. Yeah. And in that same way, that same idea, we may not have built this hotel, but we're responsible for it now. And so what can we do to create more equality, to create access, to reckon with some of the ripples and the effects of injustice on a lot of these groups in the past, and exactly how to do that, I think, is creativity in the moment, meeting the place that folks are. But I'm excited to hear some of those stories.
And I was appreciative to hear and read some of those stories, because oftentimes we find in our parishes or churches, wherever we are, there's the desire to do something, but it stops when everybody looks at each other and says, well, I don't even know where to start. So to have something there as an example.
Start somewhere, right? These groups I talked with, it was like literally just do
baby
something.
steps. And I think, I like what you're saying, because there's a difference between ignorance and willful ignorance, right? Like, it's one thing to not know. Once you learn it, what do you do? And, to reach back to last season, Rob, we had, just to commend to your reading too, Andrew, Patty Krawiak, who's a Canadian author. She's Anna Nishabe, and her book is called Becoming Kin. And in the subtitle, it says it's a guide to unforgetting. The business of unforgetting the histories that we haven't told, right? And I think that becomes such an important part of this too. But that part of your book is incredible. Another piece of the book is when you write about power as an idol. And I couldn't help but think of some of what we're seeing right now when your former clown of a president, Donald Trump, is, I don't know, 100 times indicted or whatever. And right now, currently, as we speak, is undergoing this trial because he's been found to have defrauded the state of New York.
Yeah.
And there's, images every day, and it seems like the news channels there are hell-bent on making sure he gets the attention he needs for the next election. But anyway, I get off of that. There are a lot of stories in history you write about a very high-profile evangelist encouraging Christians to be active in order to take the nation in a particular direction. In fact, we see it playing out, as I said now, and I'm going to just do a screen share. For those who are listening to this and not watching it, I'll describe these images. There are two in particular. This one here, this first image, is a fake courtroom sketch, which Trump reposted on his own social media platform from his current fraud case. And we have Trump and a white Jesus who appears to be dressed like Obi-Wan Kenobi, interestingly. And he's a big dude too.
Very big.
He's a big dude. Like, I'm like, that is a Jack Jesus.
That's
right
big
there.
Jesus. Yeah.
But
lots of hair.
Yeah, he's got lots of hair, not like me
yeah.
or Andrew here, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
And the comment above this white Jesus, along with Trump, is that this is the most accurate court sketch of all time. The perpetuator of this image says, because nobody could have made it this far alone. The implication being that Trump's cause is Jesus's cause. The second image is from his Bedminster, believe it or not, is hanging in his Bedminster golf club, and it's an image of Trump carrying a cross draped in an American flag, and included is an inscription from Psalm 112: "Surely the righteous will never be shaken." I mean, this is phenomenal.
Misspelled righteous, I think.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, they did. They also misspelled righteous. Yes.
Right. They spell right.
Righteous.
E-O-U-S. Right.
That's exactly right. And so, and even though it's misspelled, it's hanging on the wall at Bedminster, right?
Yeah.
Of course it is. But these images, I mean, we laugh at them because it's so ridiculous on one side. On the other side, though, and as you pointed out, you see a lot of this in the January 6th stuff as well. But this points to this notion, this idol of power, right? That there's that Jesus has been, or pardon me, forgive me, Lord, that Trump is being portrayed as the Messiah, as this savior that's come to deliver to people, which is blasphemous beyond, it's just crazy. But this notion of power and the way that the religious institution, particularly as it relates to evangelism in the United States, and many very outspoken evangelists, Franklin Graham right now, for instance, and others who seem to, power is such a big idol. I wonder if you can say more about that, and I'll get your reaction to these beautiful, beautiful works of art.
Yeah, there's been some really wild drawings, paintings. John, I think it's MacNaughton. He's one that, has created a lot of these in the last 4 years as well. Or I guess now it's been 7 years since 2016. But yeah, I think, a key part of the cultural framework of Christian nationalism is symbols and narratives. And so there is power in the symbols we use and how we pair them together and the narratives we tell. And I have colleagues that write about Christian nationalism as a deep story, this, feeling and narrative and these ideas of who we are, what we're all about, and where we're going. And so when we see the cross and the flag intertwined, those symbols represent something very foundational and fundamental to us in our identities. And they tell us, again, about who we are and what we're all about. And so I think, there isn't anything novel about Trump trading on Christian nationalism or rhetoric about a Christian nation. This is something that presidents on both sides of the aisle in different ways, it isn't exactly the same, but will use this type of rhetoric. And especially for Republican presidents since Ronald Reagan has really been a key part. And so there's nothing new there. I think what was new about Trump, and that really highlights the idol of power, is that he really made no move to try and show that he is personally religious or that Christianity is in any way personal to him, or that he's trying to be moral or virtuous in any, way that Christians would understand across the different expressions of Christianity in the US. And so even then, for many American Christians still supporting him, it showed that it wasn't about the virtuosity of the person in power, but that this person in power would give us access to power. And that's what it was all about. Because one really, dramatic statistic was, during the Clinton years and thereafter, the rhetoric and polling, asking folks, does a leader have to be ethical, and have virtue to be able to hold that office? And around 70% of white evangelicals said yes, right? And thinking about the Clinton years and the arguments that were being made, that whatever he did, it wasn't virtuous, and so that should be why he leaves office. Then when that same question was asked during the Trump era, it was a complete flip.
Right.
For white evangelicals, 30% said you have to be ethical and virtuous. 70% said it doesn't matter. And so in that sense, I think it lays bare, it isn't that we need the right people in power, although you'll hear that rhetoric. The right people are those that are going to give us access to power and political privilege on the things that we feel are important, our quote unquote moral issues,
right,
that tend to benefit our group. And so I think that's where power as an idol plays a key role in, as Trump kind of lays that bare for us.
So you get those Supreme Court nominations that change the trajectory of, you talk about how small actions change, so Roe v. Wade gets overturned, is it Brown versus the Board of Education next? Like at what point does it become,
or for businesses, corporations, capitalism and this view of capital, what that means, that's been tied up to be a good Christian too, even though there are many Christians who would level some very distinct critiques of capitalism.
Well, Jesus was all about big business. Jesus, he was big on big.
So that's some of that cultural baggage that just gets taken for granted. But
right. Just one final question, if we could, Andrew. Like many evangelicals, you went on a couple of mission trips when you were in high school, right? I remember I read a little bit about that. You went to Lima, Peru. But what was interesting about that, you talk about, you're preparing yourself about wanting to be a conduit for the goodness of God to all people that you were going down to spend time with. And that's really the basic crux of any mission trip, right? It's this idea that, well, I have something because I'm a follower of Jesus, and it's my call or whatever it is to share that, to give that to someone that's not. And to pass that on. Yet you found out, as many have done on many of these trips, that what actually happened was that the people you went to evangelize ended up teaching you something. And I find, on a micro level, I find that same understanding just in our church communities, because like if I were to ask maybe 10 people in my parish, why do you want people to come to our church? Their response would be something like, well, they could get to know us and they could get to know Jesus. That's probably what they'd say. But I often wonder, what would it be like to reverse that, to answer that question of why I want people to come to my community by saying, well, because those people might have something to say to me or might have something to show me. And you're right about this Christian fear of immigrants and refugees, anyone that's not like us. And that's kind of the crux of that, isn't it? And that pushback against immigration. Can you talk about how Christian nationalism plays into that fear of how we might think about, what it is to listen to those who we see as the other? Because it's this whole thing of not wanting, immigrants to come is all based on that.
Yeah. Well, fear and sense of threat. And this is operating at kind of a group level, and a sense that there's nothing unique about Christians or Americans where fear and threat is powerful, right? Any group. Right. This is like a sociological reality that fear and sense of threat are so powerful in defining who we are by showing us who we're not. So the quicker we know who they are, that helps us define who we are. So it creates these boundaries, and boundaries are powerful, and it creates motivation to act. And a lot of times too, as I try to lay out in the book, that fear and sense of threat revolve around feeling as though they are coming for our power or privilege. And so when we're thinking about xenophobia and immigration, where the empirical evidence is clear, American Christians are more opposed to want to serve, welcome immigrants. They're more likely to hold negative views of immigrants and refugees, even refugees that are Christian or have a high likelihood of being fellow Christians. There's still this desire to keep them away. And so fear and sense of threat, the reality of it, the power of it has been used over and over by political operatives and those with power to rally and motivate the masses, essentially, to support them, bring them back into power. And I think that's had a real negative influence on the American public, on American Christians. I think what they've been handed, has really been a disservice to them being able to faithfully live out what Jesus teaches and what is a theme throughout the Christian scriptures, whether it's before, Jesus, or after, as the stories in the Bible of God interacting with humans, he's constantly talking about immigrants and refugees and the oppressed and the poor and the widow and all of these folks that tend to get the short shrift of political power and influence. And so, there's a lot wrapped up in it. But that's been a key narrative of it. And Christian nationalism, because it's focused on power, is more than willing to draw those boundary lines, use sense of threat and fear to have folks only focused on protecting, quote unquote, us and keeping them at bay. And that extrapolates to immigrants and refugees and those that they view, in some way or other threaten what they hold dear and what they see as of the utmost importance. And,
I have to say that I think this is the critical part of all this too, because, and it has an effect here. I mean, in Canada, I feel like sometimes there's a time delay, because what we're hearing in the body politic here now in Canada is very similar to the rise of Trump in 2016. So there's this increased rhetoric of fear of the gay agenda, of of the pronouns and all this stuff, and it's one of our former prime ministers, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, father of the current prime minister, was once at a state dinner with Richard Nixon, and he said, living next to the United States is like sleeping next to an elephant. It's a beautiful beast, but you feel its every grunt and twitch, and it's and so I think that as it is for listeners we have in this country on this side, I think the book you've written is really critically important, because I fear for where we're headed, because I think people are buying into the divisiveness and the rhetoric. It's being used as a lever to leverage votes from a certain part of the population, which is all too happy to jump on this sort of white nationalist agenda, which is generally anti-gay, anti-immigrant, anti anything that's not white, anti anything that's not Christian, certainly. And we saw here in our own city, like I said, with the terror attack we had and a trial that's unfolding right now, just how very dangerous all of that rhetoric is. So just a terrific book, Andrew.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. American Idolatry, How Christian Nationalism Betrays the Gospel and Threatens the Church. And there it is there. Andrew Whitehead's been our guest today. We really appreciate your work and taking the time. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Thanks so much for the invitation, the conversation, for reading the book, sharing about it. It means the world. So thank you so much.
And again, our thanks to Andrew for giving us the time. I know he's a busy guy, and we were so happy he could sit with us for an hour and talk about this wonderful book. This was a really good read. And
Awesome.
You said off the top, I think, Kevin, this is accessible, right?
Yep.
Like, this is a book that every, Christian if we're in your ear today, pick this up.
Yeah,
this is important and a good read. So thanks to Andrew. American Idolatry is the book. Thanks, buddy. That was great. Our fourth episode is finished. So we'll look
in the can, as they say. It's in the can.
In the can and sealed up.
Yep.
Thank you to our sponsors again, to A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London Middlesex, both family owned and operated, to the Diocese of Huron, a community where families and individuals from Windsor to Owen Sound, Grand Bend to Port Rowan come together to worship and to serve, and to Molly Maid, make your home a healthy haven. Call Molly Maid London today.
Yes.
Until we meet again, my friends, remember, Look both ways.
Before you cross the street.
I will.
Thank you for listening. Our hosts are Kevin George and Rob Henderson. Our producer and composer is myself, Ian, with original artwork done by Elizabeth Dodman. If you have any questions or want to know where to find us, tweet us at Vickers Crossing or find us on Facebook at The Vickers Crossing. If you have any other questions about anything heard on this podcast, leave us a comment or look in the description to find out more. Thanks!